Good morning, everybody here in the auditorium and there online. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this seminar, Images in Dialogue. My name is Katja Hilska-Keinänen and I work here in the National Library of Finland as the Director of Services for Availability Services, and today I'm the host for this seminar sessions. I can see that we are very wide range of professional titles and roles and coming from many cultural heritage organizations, and I'm very happy to see you all here. I think we all have common the courage and willingness to learn new things and willingness to try new technologies to make the cultural heritage alive. We are here to share experiences from the IIIF project that we have been running here in the National Library of Finland, and to explore what the International Image of Interoperability Framework, known as IIIF, makes possible, and also to discuss how this could open new opportunities for research, teaching, collaboration, and public access. The National Library of Finland has introduced IIIF support in its digital services to improve the discoverability, usability, and international interoperability of our collections. As a national provider of digital services for the cultural heritage organizations, we also find it important to share what we have learned with all of you. In addition to the presentations that we will have this morning here, we also arrange workshops in the afternoon and also introduce our very interesting Ptolemy atlases and clandestine manuscripts in the other building in National Library of Finland, other premises there. And I hope these sessions will both inform you, also encourage you to experiment, collaborate, and imagine new ways of working with cultural heritage materials. I want to warmly welcome you all, the speakers, the arrangers, everybody here, workshop leaders, partners, and participants. My big question for today is, can we make cultural heritage materials more fun with IIIF? Can we make the materials more entertaining, engaging using IIIF? There were some technical things that I also needed to say about the Zoom comments. You can write the comments in the chat and then we read them aloud and the speakers will answer to you. Yes, that's all. I welcome Martin Kalfatovic to the stage. And Martin is the managing director of the IIIF Consortium. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Katja, for the introduction, and thank you for Susanna and the rest of the staff for organizing this session today. As Katja said, I'm Martin Kalfatovic. I'm the managing director for the IIIF Consortium, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the background around IIIF and also the consortia itself. So the consortium is staffed by just three of us, myself as managing director, Caitlin Perry, who is our communications and community manager based in the New York City area, and Glenn Robeson, who we have with us today, who's based in Aberystwyth, Wales. And it's really exciting to be here in Helsinki, not in 1841, but in today's time. And this is a map from 1841 of Helsinki using IIIF and the All Maps project to overlay that over a contemporary map so we can see what was the outline of the city back in that time. Also, it's really exciting to be here under the official launch of IIIF with the Finna organization project. And when I was here late last year in September, I had a chance to meet with the National Library director. And also at that same time as when the National Library joined the IIIF Consortium, and it was just very exciting to add the National Library of Finland to our collection of partners around the world of national libraries. So when we think about IIIF and the web, this is sort of what it looked like a long time ago. So again, it was very static. There were just images, things didn't move, and it was very non-interactive and non-interoperable. And again, when we were thinking about IIIF back at that time, it was like, what could we do to make the web more interoperable, to make it more interactive, to make it more useful? And that was the genesis of IIIF. And what could we do with content to make it much more useful and effective for research as well as entertainment? So thus was born in about late 2011, the IIIF standard with the first version of the API. And the goal of it was to be global, the international portion, interoperable, meaning mutually usable, image. Again, it was primarily for images when it was first launched, and then a framework of APIs, software, content, and community. Over time, though, the I became much more expansive and now includes audiovisual as well as 3D. So the core vision of IIIF from that 2011 through 2015 founding period was to create the global framework for digital resources from any participating institution to be delivered in a standard way, to be available through any compatible server, for display, interaction, or annotation in any application, for any user on the web. So the IIIF standard was something that was built to amplify digital content delivery and, most importantly, minimizing the bespoke building of web tools and services so that institutions were not locked into proprietary systems built by companies that would then maybe go away. It's also a model for doing all types of things, and we'll look at some of those today in terms of annotating content, such as images, audiovisual, and doing lots of other types of things with that digital content. It's also important that IIIF formed a community around the standard, and it's now a global community with 72 partners around the world that provide a leadership space and with allowed development of the standard and tools around it. So again, what are some of those things you can do with IIIF? This is sort of the canonical example from IIIF. And this is a large tax map from Japan. And it's we can use the deep zoom capability of IIIF to move around this map to deep zoom into the content of it. And the interesting part about this map is about 3 meters by 2 meters in size. So it's not the type of thing that you can easily view. As we zoom out here, we'll see the person at Stanford University who did the digitization of this map. So again, this is not the type of thing you can easily look at physically. And again, this IIIF's deep zoom capability gives you that capability to do all of that moving around the image. You can also use IIIF to cite and share regions of interest within a piece of digital content. Here we have an example of an image from University College Dublin. And again, we can use this to take portions of that images, share them, cite them with researchers and colleagues. You can also use it again to compare images, and these are a couple of images from the Wellcome collection in the UK, and we can again see how we can use the different types of scans of this, a photograph as well as the tomography of this particular specimen to look closely and compare regions of interest. Again, similar to an earlier example I showed, and this is an example from Leiden, where we can actually overlay different imaging of the same piece of content in different spectra in this case, and we can look and see what that image and that painting looks like in different wavelengths. You can also use IIIF in this newspaper example to search within the text. And again, we can do lots of work with maps, and we'll see a little bit more of that later. There's also some fun things you can do with IIIF that are really easy to do. This is a really simple, basic example of creating a small exhibition. This is the example that I did back in September when I was visiting here and the National Library of Estonia. And again, I just quickly took a map of the area and then annotated it and built a little small tour around that visit. This is, again, another one of the canonical versions and uses of IIIF, which was reuniting objects. This is a manuscript from 2 French collections where the illuminations had been cut out of the original manuscript and are stored in one institution, and then the text blocks are stored in another. Of course, neither institution wants to give up their pieces of the manuscript, but with IIIF, you can reunite those objects from different collections back into the original look and feel of that manuscript. Another example is annotations. Again, here I have an example of a botanical specimen. This is from the Smithsonian collection in Washington of a Finnish plant. And with this, I can take that botanical specimen and, again, for either teaching or other purposes, annotate the portions of that image to show the different portions of it, whether it's the roots or the fruits, etc., or the label of the specimen. There's also uses for crowdsourcing with using IIIF. And here again, we see an example. But this is the National Library of Wales. And again, we can see how we can implement crowdsourcing using IIIF. The latest portion of the IIIF standard is around 3D objects. And that official version of 3D is going to be released any day now, hopefully by June 2nd, and we'll officially launch that, but it's been in use for a number of years. So here we have an example, again, from the Smithsonian of a whale skeleton that's been 3D imaged. Then using the Smithsonian 3D Voyager, we can move that object around, we can annotate portions of it, and again, share that 3D object with users around the world. One of the things we also will be launching any day now, June 2nd to be precise, is the new strategic plan for IIIF Consortium. And we'll have our vision statement to build and sustain a global community to provide richer access to the world's image, audiovisual, and 3D digital content now and for the future. And then the larger mission statement around shepherding the development and implementation of the IIIF standard as a global standard for describing and delivering images, audiovisual, 3D content through the web, through collaboration across cultural heritage and research communities. We've had these 4 pillars of the strategic plan now for a number of years, and what we're doing with the new strategic plan is actually launching the initiatives underneath those pillars. But the pillars are how the community is working in terms of advocacy and leadership, technical development, scholarship and community development, and providing membership value to those participants in the consortia. I've been thinking a lot about what we're going to be doing going forward with IIIF. And I've sort of built some little slides around that. So the first is rolling out version 4 of the API to the community, which will happen at our annual conference coming up in June. Also, making certain that the community and users of IIIF know that the I is not just for image, but does include the audiovisual files as well as the 3D files. Also amplifying the interoperability portion. I think Finna is a great example of this by bringing together objects from across different types of cultural institutions. A lot of the work done with IIIF is usually within one institution. And again, by having a national platform like Finna, it'll enable you to bring collaboration and interoperability of digital assets across different institutions. Also, I've been interested in how IIIF can further our interaction and collaboration with the wiki community, and we'll be releasing a white paper again later next month in June called Zooming Out, which examines some of the different ways that the wiki community and IIIF can collaborate on sharing work and resources. Also, it's important to think about accessibility in terms of how digital objects are used. It's a national rule in many countries, as well as just the right thing to do. So again, how can IIIF provide accessibility or work with the accessibility community for that? And we do have a working group that is working on that within the IIIF community. Discoverability is also a challenge for IIIF. It's very difficult to find the billions and billions of IIIF digital assets that are out there. So how can we encourage the discoverability of those assets in different types of environments? And again, Finna is a great example of that because it will be exposing large amounts of Finnish content through one platform. It's also inescapable these days to have any type of presentation without mentioning artificial intelligence. And IIIF is working closely with a number of organizations that work with artificial intelligence, including the recently formalized AI for Lamb community that's has a number of organizations. And I'm not sure if National Library of Finland is part of AI for Lamb, but a lot of organizations are participating in that, and the conference will be taking place in September this year in Washington. Last year it was in London, and it'll again bring together many participants around cultural heritage and artificial intelligence. This is a ChatGPT definition of AI and IIIF in Finnish. I don't know if it's even legible or understandable. Another new initiative that we're working on in the IIIF Consortium is the Content Commons. And again, this will also work around the discoverability question and how can we actually provide value in terms of bringing together all of that IIIF content. And this is sort of a quick schematic of some of the sort of thinking we're doing about the Content Commons and how it could provide, again, that discoverability component for IIIF content in institutions around the world. And again, our key example of that is the AllMaps project, which is based in the Netherlands. And AllMaps, again, provides that layer using IIIF to provide access to maps, as well as through some of the other features, providing a discoverability layer for the content, cartographic content from collections around the world. So just a quick few notes about the consortia itself. The IIIF Consortia develops the shared APIs, implements them in software, and exposes that interoperable content. And we have a map of known implementations of IIIF. So these are ones that we know about, but again, because it is an open standard with no requirements for centralization, oftentimes we only learn about a IIIF implementation through random ways. So when Glenn and I were in Australia in 2024, we discovered a number of implementations there that we hadn't known about. And then just randomly, we discovered Boise State University in the United States has a large IIIF education project going on that we just learned about. As I mentioned, we have official global partners of the consortia, and there's two primary levels, the full membership and the associate level, and those are indicated by the colors. And again, we welcome National Library of Finland as a full member of the consortia. And we will, in the last year, we've added 4 new members to the consortia: the University of Minnesota, the University of Bern, the University of Vienna Library, and most recently, the Technical University of Delft. And again, those partners are national libraries, national museums, large research institutions, as well as smaller ones all around the world. And all of this brings together the main part of IIIF, which is the active community that develops it. As I showed earlier, there's only 3 of us who actually manage and work with the consortia, but there are thousands of people around the world that are actually developing the standard, working on it, working on viewers, etc. So again, we have communities, community groups, the technical specification group, and our editorial committee. The community groups include 3D, audiovisual, educators, maps, museums, outreach. And again, we provide all types of training and other online resources for people to use. We just had our online meeting, which is free to all to attend earlier in January this year. And keep an eye out for the next January when we'll be doing that again. And that's comprised of presentations, lightning talks, and some workshops similar to what you'll see today. There's also online training managed by Glenn, and those are done 4 times a year at times convenient to North America and European time zones. And that's a 5-day course. It's led by Glenn, but you do a lot of the work independently. We also have a number of outreach materials, and we'll be developing new versions of these outreach materials in the coming months. And then we have our annual conference. Last year, we were at the University of Leeds, which we had a very nice sessions there run by the university. And then this year, we'll be in the Netherlands, in 3 cities in the Netherlands, doing the showcase, which will be similar to the event you're seeing here today. And that will be in Amsterdam, followed by the 2 days of the conference in Leiden, and then workshops and other birds of a feather, et cetera, meetings at The Hague. So again, we encourage you all to participate in IIIF. You can join the community calls that are done roughly on a monthly basis, or some of the ones that are specifically around a topic of interest for yourself. Subscribe to the newsletter, which will provide you updates with key initiatives. And then we have a very active Slack channel with over 3,000 users on Slack with many, many channels, and it's a very friendly and welcoming space. So again, thank you very much for attending today, and we can answer some questions and then turn it over to the rest of the program.
Yes, thank you so much. Do we have questions here in the audience or online? Not yet? Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this sparked up my curiosity, and that was, again, the word that I tried to find earlier. I think everything that you can do to make cultural heritage alive, more alive, and maybe involved or embedded in people's digital experiences will make us stronger also. What do you think, what kind of resources we would need? Is it only our skills, our technical understanding that we need to implement IIIF, or do we need some other hardware or something?
I think the technical background and the work done here in Finland with the Finna project and the National Library's work has made the capability of implementing IIIF very straightforward. Now, I think really the interesting thing and the work to be done is thinking about how you can actually, what can you do with it? And I think some of the examples we'll see today will help that. So again, using that curiosity in terms of how to use the content to do interesting things with it, whether it's comparing images, whether it's annotating an audio visual material, working with maps. So I think the groundwork is laid for using IIIF, and in my workshop, I'll show you some of those sort of fun, interesting things you can do with IIIF content, and Glenn's workshop will be a bit more technical in terms of getting into the details of that. But once the materials are available, and with the Finna project, we can actually see a number of the resources, and you can do all kinds of things, comparing the images to each other, annotating them, etc. So I think the key thing will also be working with the education community. How can this work within universities and getting instructors to, again, use this digital assets to do all types of new types of learning opportunities.
Yes, thank you. Other comments, questions? Do you already get some ideas? Yes, okay, thank you. Next we have Susanna. Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much. And next we have Susanna Eklund from the National Library of Finland. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me if I stand?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I'll check if this works. Okay, this works. Great. So I'm Susanna Eklund, and I work at the National Library, and I'm the project manager for our Images in Dialogue project that has organized this seminar today. And I'm really happy to see many of you here live with us, but also there are quite a lot of people online. So we are something like a bit over 80 people have registered altogether. And for me, this is special because I've been taking lectures before in this room, but this is the first time I'm standing on the podium presenting something. So I'm kind of grown up now. Yeah. So today I'm going to tell about the project. There are people with us who don't necessarily know or haven't heard the presentations before, and then don't necessarily know our services. So I'm going to tell something about them, but then I'm going to tell what we've done in the project and what we've learned so far. So a few words about the National Library. So our library, National Library, we're the oldest and largest scientific library in Finland, and our roots are back in 1640. And then we are also an independent institution in the University of Helsinki. So today we are not in the National Library facilities, but at the university facilities in Portania. And then the campus, you can kind of in the middle of the central campus. Our library is funded by the Ministry of Education and Culture, and then we also apply for external project funding, which is important to us. Our mission, and it's also stated in legally, so our mission is to preserve, maintain, and ensure the access to Finland's published heritage. And then this means that we have both physical collections and services related to that, and we also have the legal deposit service. But then compared to kind of distinguishing us from some other national libraries, we are also a producer of digital services and national infrastructure for Finnish libraries, archives, and museums. And this gives us a central role in the cultural heritage field in Finland. And we're also active in international networks. And we have facilities both in Helsinki and in Mikkeli. So we have our research library and collections here in Helsinki, and then conservation and offices here. And then in Mikkeli, we have our digitization center and also conservation. These are some of the digital services that we provide. Finna, Martin already mentioned Finna. I'm going to talk about it a bit more today. We have publication repositories that are based on DSpace. And then we have this digi.kansalliskirjasto.fi that has our digitized newspapers and that sort of stuff. And Finna is kind of combining collections from these services. But we also provide a library system, Koha, one version of it. And then we have this national repository for library metadata, Melinda, that kind of empowers collaborative cataloging. And then we have different kinds of other services such as ontology and automated indexing services like Pinto and Annif, and permanent identifier services and so on. But so Finna and Digi and the publication repository are central for this project. And a few words about Finna. This is a service that has been launched already in 2013. It's open source, and it's funded by the Ministry of Education and Culture. And it's a very essential part of Finnish cultural heritage digital infrastructure. It's it has three parts. So Finna.fi is a user interface and search service that combines everything that comes from different data providers. Then we have a platform service that the data providers, such as museums, archives, and libraries, can use to make their own search service for their own collections. And then we have information reuse services, APIs, and and an aggregation service for Europeana for the Finnish content. We have a huge amount of data providers, over 470 organizations from Finland, and the usage last year was almost 60 million visits without the bots, but with the bots it's a lot more. So with Finna we have challenges of a big service. So we support almost 30 different background systems and have a huge amount of records and numerous object types and heterogeneous metadata and so we support 7 metadata formats and so on. And we also have 4 user interface languages: Finnish, English, Swedish, and North Sami. Then Digi, it has been launched in 2001. It's one of the first online systems for presenting and searching from text contexts. There are millions of pages of digitized newspapers, journals, manuscripts, maps, and so on. There are 750,000 users annually, and this is a system that is built in-house. And important is that it's very close to the digitization project process, and the metadata formats, they differ a bit from the ones that are supported by Finna, but they're still so they are Mets and Aalto and so on. And then the repository services. We run a host of services on the open source DSpace platform, both for external clients and internal purposes. And one of the internal purpose is this Fragmenta Membranea collection that you will hear more about later on today. That is still on a legacy version. That needs to be upgraded before we can get the collection as IIIF resources to Finna. So the project, Images in Dialogue. First of all, we are deeply grateful for our funder, the Janne and Aatos Erkko Foundation, for funding this project. It's been running on since last year, and we have 2 goals. First one is to improve the interoperability of our own services and the usability of our collections, both nationally and internationally. So this means that the technical implementation and support for IIIF standard in our own systems, Digi, Finna, the formula aggregation service for Europeana, and then the repository services. And then the second goal is doing IIIF outreach in Finland. So this is what we are doing now today with you. So we want to communicate to the Finna data providers why implementing IIIF is a good idea and how it can be done, and then to the end users how IIIF resources can be reused and what is their added value. So what have we done so far regarding the technical implementation? In Digi, we have taken Cantaloupe image server for our images, and then we have implemented the presentation API so that we get the IIIF manifests, and we've made the IIIF manifest link available in Digi, and also through Melinda it comes to Finna. And on the Finna side, we recognize the manifests in the metadata, and we also can filter them. We have implemented the Tiffy viewer on the record page of Finna, and added a toolbox there to help reuse of the collections. And then we've done user guidelines for the end users, and then we have also published data provider guidelines, so that you can kind of see how you can bring IIIF resources to Finna. And then we've done also some user testing that we'll use for further improvement. And I'll show what they look like in Finna at the moment, and also Digi. So first I'll show how you can find the IIIF manifest in Digi. So when you have found an interesting item, you can find many of the collections. They already have the IIIF manifest that you will learn more about what it is and how it can be used in the workshops in the afternoon. So and you can also kind of, that's what Martin will teach you, and then Glenn will teach you how to make them. So you can find it from the references here. So you just, but it's a bit hidden here, but you can find it here. In Finna, you can find the IIIF resources. The easiest way is by doing a search with the, sorry, this is in Finnish. So we have a media type filter here, so you can find the IIIF materials here easily, and you recognize the records with IIIF resources from this label here. So this is the Tifi viewer with all sorts of, I won't go through the functionalities now, but you can kind of explore it yourself. But this is the viewer, and then it makes sorry, I'm at a loss of English words, but you can kind of you can zoom the item and so on here, and here's the IIIF toolbox that we are going to improve a bit based on the user testing. Yeah, so this is how it looks at the moment, and the metadata in the manifest you can see also in the Tifi viewer, and we've also added links back to Finna and Digi, so when the user takes the IIIF manifest somewhere else, then they get back to the source of the data and the kind of the full metadata that you can find on the record page here. Yeah, so this is how it looks like in Finna at the moment. Let's see where my presentation is. Here it is. Okay, so what still needs to be done technically? We have still some decisions to make. We're kind of thinking about implementing our own version of Mirador, offering it in the Finna toolbox, and offering it is also from Digi, so that it would be easy to open and compare items. But there's this question of long-term maintenance and that sort of questions that we need to still decide and make decisions on. So that's something that's still in progress. We also need to decide which other collections than the Ptolemy atlases and clandestine manuscripts will get a IIIF manifest. And also we need to figure out how IIIF should be integrated in the cataloging process to make it easier. Then haven't started the Europeana part of our project. That should be starting this summer. We need to do a Mark to EDM conversion to make that happen. And then is the Fragmenta Membranea part. So we need to update DSpace to the newer version that has IIIF support already. And then we need to experiment with IIIF too. So now we get to do the fun stuff. So we had the technical part until now, and now we get to start exploring. And then we want to make some reuse demos so that it's kind of more interesting for you to see what can be done. And then as I mentioned before, we will improve the IIIF functionalities in Finna according to feedback that we've gotten in user testing. And then our outreach goal, what we've done so far, well, we've given a lot of presentations. Not all of these are for the Finnish audience. Some of these are in the IIIF community, but anyway, we've really done a lot of presentations. And we've hosted 2 events, this one today, and the one last autumn where Martin was also. And we've produced guidelines for Finna data providers. We had Olli Koskinen, who's sitting in the back of the room. He helped us, and he did the guidelines for us. So that's really great. And then we have one article that's coming. Ronja has written to Tietolinja, and it's going to be published in June, I think. Yeah. So that's a good one also. Yeah. And then kind of the point has been to raise IIIF awareness in Finland. So how we've done so far, you can see in this graph. And I'm sorry about the small text on the screen here. I think remotely you can see it better. But last year, when I did this survey in the Finna data provider meetings, most sectors had not heard about IIIF that much. The museums had, because I previously was the service designer who was responsible for the museums, and since we've been dreaming of IIIF since 2017 and talking about it, so that kind of showed there. So they had heard about it before, but some other sectors as well. But now the result was different. So most people had already heard something about it, and some had even had a look at it and taken training or something. So that's nice to see that what you're kind of talking, the impact of talking a lot. And then I asked also our data providers, are their organization planning to provide data as IIIF to Finna? So this is what it looks like. So a lot of organizations still don't know, but some are considering it, and one is even planning to test during this year, but more in the coming years. But there are also sectors that don't see kind of the added value yet. And what still needs to be done regarding outreach. The first one, I think, is the most important one. So communicating the added value IIIF brings to sharing and reusing collections, and this is something that the IIIF community has been doing for years and years, and kind of I think that's one of the challenges you are kind of addressing all the time, and this is kind of the work that we are now starting with in Finland and have started with. But we are kind of shifting for the rest of the project until the kind of after summer, we'll focus a bit from the data providers to end users. So kind of try to maybe, well, let's see how we'll do it. But yeah, but we are going to change the focus a bit, and we are trying to come up with some interesting reuse demos. One way I think that we should do is organize some kind of training in Finnish for the Finnish audience. And then also we need to support new IIIF adopters. So we kind of, if you are planning to do something about it this year, then please let me know. And then we are looking into possibilities for some collaborative projects and funding there. So if you wish to provide IIIF resources to Finna, then Glenn has this amazing IIIF training in English. And then regarding Finna, we already have the Finnish guidelines. We are going to translate them in Swedish as well. And the last slides, maybe the most important ones. So what have we learned? I think one really important thing has been kind of improving the interoperability of our systems, especially improving understanding of our own processes, requirements and limits of the systems. So kind of understanding over unit silos and service silos. That's something that's really valuable for us. And also having taken time to experiment hands-on with tools and viewers is really important. In the technical workshop, in addition to Glenn's presentation, Ronja and Tuula from our side are going to speak about this side a bit more, what we've done technically. But for example, the Tiffy viewer on the record page, it was not the first one we tried. So we maybe, how many were there? 4 or 5 that we hands-on tried, but the only way to find the right fit for Finna was to really dive deep. Also, we learned that our default image quality was not enough for deep zoom. It's good enough for viewing the items, but if you want deep zoom, then you need to provide a really good resolution. And that's something that we also are discussing. So what quality images are we going to provide from Digi to Finna as IIIF? Then the image server performance, that's something that we've kind of improved a lot already, but there's been some work, and then still we are kind of improving it. Yeah, and then I think that's something that Tuula and Ronja will talk about more in the technical workshop also in the afternoon. And then a really important one for all projects that do kind of the new fun stuff is considering the maintenance phase after the project. So when you build new stuff, then you need to kind of prepare for the maintenance as well, and not make decisions that get you in problems after the project is ended. And then even though we have kind of two. Well, we've had a few people kind of working directly for the project, but we couldn't have done what we've done until now without the support of the entire library. So we are something like 250 people in total, and I counted that almost 40 people have been supporting us in somehow. Some people have been supporting more and some less, but it's a really big group of experts that we've needed because our processes are very complex and the systems are so that's, I'm very grateful for that support. Yeah, then the patience and sisu. Finns know what sisu means. That means kind of perseverance. So yeah, and persistence. So we've had IIIF as a dream since 2017 at least, and it really took us time to. We talked about it a lot, but it took us time to make it happen. But now we have made it happen. So yeah, that's. Thank you. So yeah, but and then the last one is that came already in the outreach, but really we really must invest in communicating the added value, and that's kind of, we understand it already in a way, but how to communicate it to researchers and teachers and data providers, that's kind of the challenge that we still are facing. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Susanna, very much. Is there questions, comments online? No? Okay. There's a question, yeah.
Yes.
That's better.
Okay, sorry. So once more, Tuuli Alho from the Finnish Postal Museum. So a question from the point of view of a data provider to Finna. So you said that the minimum requirement is that the background system is compatible with the IIIF API. So does that mean that so for example, for our collection management system where Finna harvests our data, so does the collection management system itself have to be like compatible with the API, or is it enough to provide the manifests as text to Finna?
You need to come up with the manifest. So you need the kind of support for the presentation API. But regarding the collection management system and the metadata that comes to Finna, you need to get the manifest in the metadata in the right field. That's right. Kind of enough for Finna. So what happens, how you kind of solve the support for the presentation API. Right. That's your problem in a sense.
Okay, yeah. So, no, I think it makes sense. I might have to, be in touch to get like individualized support for this, but because our IIIF pictures are in an external server and there's no way to like get them in our collection management system.
You have.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But via our collection management system that talks with Finna, we can get the manifests as basically links or text. So
yeah, but if you I think that it's enough to get, if you already have the manifests for them, right. Then it's enough for you to put them in the kind of in the metadata that comes to Finna.
Yeah. Right, and that will be enough for it to work in Finna.
Yeah, as long as it comes in the right Lido field.
Okay, yeah, okay, beautiful. Thank you very much. That sounds really
and
great.
it needs to be the manifest link and not the image API link.
Right.
So not only the kind of not only the direct link to the image file, but the manifest link that has also the metadata.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. That clarified it.
Yeah. Thank you for the very good question and practical answers. Are there more? Well, I want to ask Susanna if you've been dreaming about IIIF from 2017. What did you see then to be possible with IIIF?
I wasn't the only one dreaming. I think that there were people who were dreaming about it before me. I think it was it was Maria and maybe Jyrki who heard about it first in some seminar somewhere, and they mentioned about it, and then we started to dream together, and we had somebody talking about it in our Kirjastoverkkopäivät seminar in 2017. I think for us the interoperability and the kind of new ways, easier ways to reuse collections and kind of the international interoperability, kind of the core of IIIF was the one thing that appealed to us.
Yes, very nice.
We saw the kind of potential for us.
Yeah. And the added value.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is the added value you see for the people, for the users?
Yeah, I think one important thing is kind of getting rid of the system silos. I think that's one really important one, and kind of doing and then the annotation side is also so you can add information on the content and share it. Yeah, but we haven't gotten there yet, but that's something that is really kind of has the most potential for us, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's very important for us to see the goals and see the added values, and then we can work the technical implementation and hush the challenges of technical difficulties.
No, we can't hush them. We need to address them.
Yes. Okay, let's do that. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Now we have a small break for just walking around a bit, and also online you can take a small break. We continue 10:45 with Anna Vuolanto.
Yeah, we wanted to offer you a possibility to not only hear what many of you kind of have already somewhat heard in some other situations about the project and what we've been doing, but we wanted you to be able to learn more about the pilot collections, because that's the core of our operations is in our collections. And then we also wanted to offer you the end user perspective. So we are getting a very interesting presentation from Sweden. David Haskiya from Riksarkivet will tell us why the Codicum project wants our Fragmenta Membranea as IIIF. So let's be back at 11.
Yeah, see you soon. Thanks. Next we have Anna Vuolanto, who's giving us an introduction to pilot collections that we have worked with in this project. Anna comes from the National Library of Finland. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Today I will present the first two collections in our library that have received a IIIF manifest and can now be used with this technology. I will not, however, go into IIIF itself, because there are specialists for that. And I work among the special collections at the National Library and will therefore focus on the materials themselves. I will answer the following simple questions. What are the Ptolemy atlases and the Clandestine manuscripts? And how did they end up in the library and how they have been studied? I will begin with the Ptolemy atlases. I was a project leader when they were digitized some years ago, and I'm also responsible for the Nordenskiöld collection to which they belong. And the collection of clandestine manuscripts I will present on behalf of my colleague, Mika Hakkarainen, curator of the special collections at the National Library, who was unfortunately unable to join us today. And articles on both these lately digitized collections can be found in the online journal Tietolinja, published by the National Library. Here you can see the first ever printed Ptolemaic world map, showing the world as it was known in Ptolemy's time, that is, in the 2nd century Common Era. And this particular map was printed in 1477. But before going into Ptolemy and the atlases themselves, I will say a few words about the Nordenskiöld collection in which they belong. It was Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld, a native Finnish scholar and explorer, who assembled this collection above all to serve his own scholarly purposes. He made his career in Sweden and is best known for his voyage through the Northeast Passage in 1878 and 79. And he prepared this and other expeditions with great care. And this is one reason for such an extensive collection of literature now. It covers a substantial range of early printed maps and books, some 4,000 works on scientific literature, travel accounts, ethnographic publications, atlases, and others. And Nordenskiöld also studied the history of cartography, especially with regard to the northern parts of the globe. And after the famous Northeast expedition during the 1880s, he systematically collected works on Ptolemaic geography and published also 2 major works on the history of cartography, at that time still a little studied field, focusing on the classical and early modern eras. And this collection of Nordenskiöld and his scientific literature was acquired by the National Library of Finland soon after Nordenskiöld's death in 1902. And when this collection was nominated to the UNESCO's Memory of the World Register in 1997, which makes it 30 years today, next year, one of the reasons given was the integrity of its corpus of Ptolemaic atlases. But now I will come to the actual Ptolemy atlases, which I've already mentioned several times. What do I mean when I speak of a Ptolemy atlas? Well, the Ptolemy atlases are a group of printed books published from 1475 onwards until the 18th century, and they consist of the following parts. First, a Ptolemy atlas contains an ancient work, Geographia, by Claudius Ptolemy. He was an Egyptian Greek mathematician and geographer in ancient Roman Alexandria, living in the 2nd century. The original Greek work, Geographica Hyphagesis, appeared around the year 150, and it is a treatise on the collection and organization of geographical knowledge and on the methods of making maps. In this work, Ptolemy presented instructions on how to draw a world map and 26 regional maps of the known world with different projections, which means he introduced ways of representing the 3-dimensional Earth on a 2-dimensional surface. It is worth noting that Ptolemy does not use the term projection. It's a modern concept. And although Ptolemy shows the cosmos as geocentric, his projections were and are crucial still today. And with this and other survived works, he has significantly influenced the development of Western science. A majority of Geographia consists of lists of place names with coordinates to be plotted on a map. And the number of place names varies between 5 to 8,000. So they offer a great deal of opportunities for different kinds of studies of languages and places and naming places, for example. Like other ancient and medieval literature, Geographia was transmitted over the centuries in a chain of manuscript copies. No ancient manuscript is known to have survived, and the work seems to have disappeared in the Western European knowledge until the 14th century, when a copy likely traveled from Byzantium to Italy and became known in Western Europe through a Latin translation at the beginning of the 15th century. It is not known whether Ptolemy himself or his workshop did draw maps, but in this early Byzantine manuscript, the 27 Ptolemaic maps appear. Therefore, secondly, the Ptolemy atlases, which I'm talking today, include also various maps. And with the spread of the printing press techniques, Ptolemy's Geographia was quickly published in printed form as well. The first printed edition appeared in 1475 without maps, but just 2 years later, an edition including all these 27 maps was published. In the earliest editions, the maps are based almost exclusively on Ptolemy's text. But very soon, however, maps reflecting the latest and rapidly expanding geographical knowledge were added to the Ptolemaic corpus. And then third, in addition to the text by Ptolemy and the Ptolemaic maps, additional elements were introduced both in the maps and in the text, including independent treatises commenting on Ptolemy's original work already. These appear already in the earliest 15th century editions. Also, different kind of indexes were published. And the Ptolemy's geocentric model was not yet seriously criticized, but his information was refined and applied in new ways. It should be noted that neither Ptolemy nor the publishers of the 15th century or 16th centuries used the term atlas in this sense that I'm using. And in my context, the term refers specifically to a compilation of texts and maps originating from different times. And in the National Library's Nordenskiöld collection, we have a nearly complete collection of these Ptolemies from the 15th and 16th centuries. Altogether, 38 different editions of the Ptolemies were published in the 15th and 16th centuries. In our collection, there are all 7 editions published in the 15th century and all but 1 of the 16th century editions. And these all are in photocopies. And the editions of the 17th and 18th centuries are mainly reprints of the 16th century editions. Then we have also 1 manuscript copy on paper without the Ptolemy's text, only maps, which is shown here. Oh yeah, and these are the books that these atlases are. So in total, 47 digital copies were made during the digitization project, and this digital collection of these Ptolemy atlases contains nearly 2,000 maps in total. Why then was Ptolemy's Geographia copied and printed so intensively in the 15th and 16th centuries, precisely at the same time as European knowledge of different parts of the globe was expanding? Although Ptolemy wrote his work in the 2nd century, its mathematical and empirical models went largely unchallenged for more than a millennium. And this map shows today's Sri Lanka, Taprobana Insula. And Ptolemy treated it at the very end of his work because it was kind of end of his known world. And therefore, it's the final map of the Ptolemaic 26 regional maps collection. Then there is this other map printed in Venice later, and this edition has nearly 70 maps in total. But still, these Ptolemaic maps also survive. So especially around the turn of the 16th century, the European image of different regions of the globe was shaped by the numerous voyages, and the understanding of the cosmos itself was changing and developing. Within the scholarly tradition, however, Renaissance humanists were not primarily interested in empirical research. They emphasized the authority of ancient authors. The humanist ideal of returning to sources and the increased interest in natural philosophy are clearly reflected in the various early printed editions of the Ptolemy atlases. And the Catholic Church was the authority in science, and Ptolemy's geocentric cosmos fitted this framework very well. And as I said, new maps were added to reflect the contemporary geographical knowledge to these atlases. And among them is this map of Northern Europe, which was, of course, not part of the original Geographia because Ptolemy did not know these regions. And here you can see today's Denmark, Sweden, also Arctic Ocean is depicted. And then another example, Palestine, which was a central setting for biblical events, but not for Ptolemy, but the 15th century readers and publishers. So these are also these non-Ptolemaic new modern maps of these atlases. And then, of course, the world map, the Ptolemaic world map, and this is the first world map which was based on the new knowledge of the world. And there is America named for the first time after Amerigo Vespucci in this map. So to summarize, these Ptolemy atlases place all the contemporary knowledge side by side with the classical sources, this Ptolemy's text and Ptolemy's maps, and those maps drawn according to Ptolemy's instructions, and it illustrates a Europe-centered worldview. You can see that Europe is in the very center of this map. And these maps are therefore an excellent source for studying that worldview also from a critical perspective. Then I will move on to the clandestine manuscripts. And the clandestine literature refers to the forbidden philosophical literature of the Enlightenment, especially the 18th century. In France, clandestine literature was shaped by advanced censorship and by decrees and regulations issued by Richelieu and Goldberg during the 17th century. And what kinds of works could be published and printed was strictly restricted before the French Revolution in the late 18th century. And the French term alludes to secrecy, while the German refers to underground literature. And the National Library's collection of 55 works of hand-copied clandestine literature is significant. The works came to the library when the university was re-established in Helsinki after the Great Fire of Turku in 1827, when the library received large quantities of books and various private collections as donations from many different sources. The background to this clandestine literature collection is the 1832 donation by cavalry captain Paul Alexandrov, who was the illegitimate son of the Grand Duke Konstantin Pavlovich. And his library was kept in the Marble Palace in St. Petersburg, and it contained a substantial amount of French Enlightenment literature due to the fact that it included also a part of the library of the Baltic German Johann Albrecht von Korff. And von Korff served in various positions in the Russian imperial administration, and he was also a freethinker and a bibliophile. And Empress Catherine the Great bought von Korff's library, and that's how it ended up here as this donation mentioned before. And this Korff's library contained clandestine literature, which was of particular interest to him. Also printed clandestine and this hand-copied clandestine literature. And the uniqueness of this collection here in the National Library is illustrated by the fact that the largest collection of this kind of literature in handwritten form is the collection of 96 works in the Bibliothèque Mazarin in Paris, and that only 376 such manuscripts are known altogether. So, and our collection's holdings include both great rarities and completely unique copies. But what was this forbidden literature and why was it banned? Above all, it was religious criticism directed at the monotheistic religions. The works deal with deism, pantheism, materialism, atheism. In other words, the religious and philosophical thought of the time of the libertines. Forbidden books were printed often outside France, and they also circulated as handwritten copies such as these. There was a printing house in Switzerland near the French border, which was one of the most important printing centers for the works that were banned in France. And according to the surviving archival catalogues, the three most sought after categories of materials were philosophy, pornography, and gossip literature relating to scandals at the French court. With the exception of the last category, these terms should not be understood in their modern sense. Under the label pornography is mainly found erotic novels, which could be in fact highly philosophical. And contrary to current usage, in the 18th century, the category philosophy included a great deal of religiously critical material, in which the connection between religious and philosophical free thought was very strong. As an example, the image shows the three impostors, which circulated both in Latin and in French. The text was already known in the 13th century. It is fiercely anti-religious. It mocks and blasphemes the monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The three founders of these religions, Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad, are exposed as impostors, and their miracles are revealed to be mere conjuring tricks. The Three Impostors is the best known and most widely disseminated clandestine text of the radical Enlightenment. It was sought after both by churchmen and by bibliophiles. The church wanted to remove the text from readers' reach when bibliophiles wanted this curiosity in their collections. In the 18th century, 2/3 of the French printed works circulating on the book market were, under the decrees I mentioned earlier, illegal and thus clandestine. They were printed either without a printing privilege in French printing houses or more commonly abroad in Switzerland, England, the Netherlands, or along the Rhine. According to estimates by the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, more than 50% of French literature between 1750 and 1800 was printed in these countries. The books were smuggled across the border and sold under the counter. This was because printing and distributing clandestine material could have serious consequences for those who were caught. Of the prisoners serving sentences in the famous Bastille prison in the 1780s, 40% had been convicted for such offences. And this was also the reason for copying these books by hand. The work described above, The Three Impostors, was apparently also published in French in 1718 and printed in Rotterdam, but no copies of this edition have survived in public libraries. By the mid-17th century at the latest, and probably earlier, various handwritten versions of this text were already in circulation. 2 such manuscripts ended up in Helsinki with von Kor's library. The title page of the first one you saw just on the previous slide, and this is the second, which is attributed to Baruch Spinoza, who was already in his own lifetime known as a freethinker and deist, and most of whose works were banned across Europe. Linking a text to a well-known figure increased demand, but the actual author of this text has remained a matter of speculation. That, in brief, is the introduction to clandestine literature and these manuscripts in the National Library. The Finnish scholar Timo Kaitaro has done important work in studying these subjects, and over the past 5 years, since this collection was digitized, an international group of scholars has discovered it and is actively using it. And the IIIF technology makes it possible in a very special way to compare the different versions of these works, such as Ptolemy's as well, I would guess. So here you can see 2 images which depict the digital collections of these materials, the Ptolemy's and the clandestine manuscripts. And they can be accessed, the both collections, from these links, which lead to library database. And you can find a great number of other digitized collections there as well. But now I'm ready, and I thank you for listening. And if you have some questions, probably we have time.
Thank you, Anna. I think we have time.
Thank you for that presentation, especially on the Ptolemy manuscripts. And I think that would be a very interesting example for using IIIF, because you have so many variants of the different manuscripts and the printed versions. So I think that'll be a really exciting opportunity to do IIIF implementations with those.
Yes, thank you. Yes, there's many digitized manuscripts of these Ptolemies, so it's very effective. Yes, thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Anna. Next, we have Jaakko Tahkokallio, who is the expert on our Fragmenta Membranea collection.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jaakko. Presently, I'm working at the Faculty of Theology in a research project called Codicum, about which you will hear more from the next speaker, David Haskiya, who is just entering the room. But I work kind of on a permanent basis. I'm employed by the National Library as well, so I'm a special collections information specialist at the library and responsible for part of our kind of pre-19th century collections. And I will be just introducing to you one of our collections that's not yet IIIF, but is kind of has been on the plans, and for which this compatibility would be a good thing. And you will also, those of you who will go to the viewing of some items from our special collections will also see 1 or 2 fragments from this collection during the lunch break. So what is the Fragmenta Membranea, or the medieval fragment collection of the National Library? I'm a historian, so I will introduce it through its history, of course. In the Middle Ages, Finland was part of the Swedish kingdom, and you can see its approximate borders here. The only institution with lots of books in this era was, of course, the church, and there were. That's how writing came to Finland, written culture. So it's mostly in the Middle Ages. We have Latin books in all of our parish churches. That's the main type of written material or book type material that we have. So Finland had in the medieval period about 150 churches perhaps, and they each would have a couple of books. These are complete medieval books from the library's collection. 3 of them are actually late 4th, 15th century printed books. They're not manuscripts, but in any case, they are in medieval binding. So all these churches would have some books for liturgy and theological books also, and things like this. And then came Reformation in the 16th century associated with this man, Gustavus Vasa, the Swedish king, from 1527 onwards, and so Catholicism was abandoned, and kind of the Lutheran confession adopted, and this of course meant that all the liturgical and other religious books of the medieval era became sort of useless. Not overnight, it was quite a long transition. So priests were still using actually Catholic books at the end of the 16th century for some purposes. So it wasn't like an overnight thing. But in any case, this material became sort of unnecessary. And what Gustav Vasa also did was he reorganized the tax administration of the realm. So it became more effective. And one of the things that now started happening was that tax accounts from all over the kingdom were taken to Stockholm each year for an audit. So the kingdom was divided into these things called bailiwicks, usually in English, and there were about perhaps between 100 and 200 in all of the Swedish realm. And from each of these bailiwicks, like 4 or 5 booklets of accounts would be taken to Stockholm for audit annually. And what they did with the medieval books was that they started using the parchment leaves of these books, because many of these are quite big books and the leaves are made of parchment, so animal skin-based material that's very durable. So they started reusing this material. In pre-modern world, you would recycle everything. They were much better at recycling than we are. So they would recycle this material for many purposes. Also for, we have like organs, which have been prepared with, this, what are they called in English? In any case, organs have this, that make the air flow there, for instance, in Tallinn. And we have also, they've been used, some of the Stradivari instruments, for instance, have pieces of parchment inside them. So they were using this for a wide variety of purposes and in book bindings. And what the main thing that preserved the medieval material to our day in this Swedish kingdom and Finland was this reuse of these leaves as covers for these account booklets. So here you can see leaves. They are all from the same medieval 15th century book. And you can see there are headlines in 16th century handwriting written there. It's actually the lower margin of the book. Its leaf has been kind of turned upside down. Yeah, and there you see like 1556 accounts and so forth. So they did this systematically with the medieval books for about 100 years. So all these accounts, so we are talking about between 500 and 1,000 account booklets from all of the Swedish kingdom. Each year, for about 100 years, they were covering them in medieval parchment. So this, what they effectively did, they sampled the collections of all the churches at the time of the Reformation. And this created a very unique collection from a European perspective, because usually these books from like local churches don't survive. They were recycled everywhere. Also in Catholic Europe. They were printed books. There was new liturgy after the Council of Trent. So they just redid this, and this just went somewhere. But in our case, most of this somewhere was the Royal Archives. So the account books and with these medieval covers went to Sweden, to Stockholm. Now the collection suffered in 1807. There were several fires that it survived, but in 1807 there was a big fire that destroyed about a fourth of this collection. So it was initially almost 40,000 medieval fragments, 40,000 account books, but now we have little less than 30,000 account books left. And as said, they were in Stockholm. That was the administrative capital, or the capital of the realm. But then in 1809, as you know, Sweden lost Finland to Russia, as it was perceived at the time. It was the most traumatic event of Swedish history. Swedes are mostly forgotten about this in the sense, but in the early 19th century, it was a massive shock that Finland became part of the Russian Empire. And as part of the peace treaty, it was decided that all administrative material dealing with the Finnish part of the Swedish kingdom needed to be given over to the new governing authorities, the Russian administration in Finland. So also the 16th century tax accounts were shipped over to Finland between 1810 and 1812. They first arrived in Turku, and then the biggest installment was taken by sleighs over in very wet March conditions 2 days to Helsinki, all these account books in 1812. And so we received about 6,600 early modern account books, all with medieval covers. And then in the 19th century, people were mostly not that interested in this material. It's the National Romantic era. These are some pieces of Catholic books, and Finland is, of course, a deeply Lutheran country. So it was kind of not the first thing that historians would be excited about. We have some liturgical books from the Middle Ages. Why is that interesting? But slowly, the interest started to build up. And the first thing that caught researchers' attention was the printed books there. Those are 16th century printed books that had been printed for the Finnish part of the kingdom. It was just one diocese, so the Diocese of Turku. And they discovered books that they didn't know about there. So there's this manual. So it's kind of a baptism and this kind of rituals. This is the so-called manual of Turku Manuale buoyancy, and this researcher, Rönnblad, discovered it there. And then he started removing the manual leaves, the book leaves from the accounts, and bound them actually in a new book. So they're kind of recreating this 15th century printed book. And they did this for many of the print fragments. So they just took them away from the accounts, they cropped them, so they cut the leaves so that they would create a nicer binding, and recreated these lost books. That's how it started. But in Finland, it led to kind of that all these medieval leaves from around the accounts were removed from the accounts in the 19th century. So they kind of decided that these are books. The accounts are like administrative material. They belong to the archive. So they were in what was then the Senate's archive, then it became a state archive. Now it's the National Archive. So the tax accounts are there. But they decided in the 19th century that these being leaves of books, so they should be in the library. So they transferred the leaves of books detached from the accounts to what was then the Helsinki University main library, and what is now the National Library. So that was how the accounts and the book fragments were separated from another. And what they also did in the 19th century or early 20th century, so researchers went through this material and brought leaves coming from the same book together. So they are here in the National Library, they are kind of archived. So this is like two leaves that survive from one book in our collection. So they are always in the same folder, and they have a shelf mark. So they've been also catalogued as books, even though we usually have only one or two or four or so leaves from one book. And this created this very big, by far our biggest medieval collection. So it is about 6,600 fragments, and they come from around 1,200 different books. And 80% of these books are liturgical books. And this is one of the liturgical books as well. It's a missal, so a book for the Mass. And it was actually, we know quite a lot about this one. So this was produced in London around 1200. It's part of a very big group of books that was ordered by the Swedish king and the bishops from London for Swedish parish churches in the early 13th century. Would you imagine? So it's about 50 books that they ordered from London. It's a very interesting historical phenomenon. But in any case, we have the material is mostly 80% liturgical. So from the 12th century up to the 15th century, books for the Mass and the Divine Office. And then about 20% of it is scholarly books. So theological books, books of canon law, Roman law, and these books were mostly imported from Europe, from Paris, and later from German university cities by people who went from what was then the Swedish kingdom, I mean today's Sweden and Finland, went to study there and bought books there and brought them here. All of this collection, like the Stockholm collection, I mean, most of these fragments remain in Stockholm, obviously. So we have just the Finnish part of the account and fragment collection. They have been digitized. So we have this online collection called Fragmenta Membranea, where everything has been kind of it's a DSpace based system, kind of a custom DSpace interface for those of you who are into that kind of thing. And so we have there this is like the record for a single book. So you can see basically that it has the shelf mark 117. It's one missal from the 12th century. And there are the preview kind of thumbnail images that show you that there are about 10 or so fragments that have been identified as belonging to this one book and then cataloged together. And there they've been scanned. This was produced between around 2010, like 2009, 2011. And it's quite early days in making digital collections, in creating digital collections in a way, but they've been digitized in very high quality. And even though it's quite simple, so it's from the researcher's perspective, it's a very good user interface. And the fact that there are big TIFF files for all images, about 80 megabyte files for all the images, kind of makes it also in the future, I mean, worthwhile keeping it online and keeping the support going. So it's serving researchers very well. And it is in this from the IIIF perspective. So, well, David will probably talk more about these things, but the IIIF has been used quite a lot in the context of medieval manuscript studies. So there are these major initiatives like the IIIF, the French Institute for History of Textual Research. Their database it's now called ARCA, the present one. that uses, for instance, is based kind of on IIIF, and there are also other similar systems. For instance, the Handskriften portal, the German portal, which also has some like IIIF actual features, so that you can, for instance, compare different manuscripts. You could even import material from another collection to this viewer. Like if Fragmenta was compatible, you could, for instance, bring it there to look at. So this is basically there's quite a strong history of use for IIIF within this community that studies medieval manuscript material. And yes, this was actually what I planned to say about the collection. So if you want to know anything more, I can speak about it for as long as you wish. And so I welcome any questions and welcome you to view the fragments and the atlases and the clandestine material at the library soon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jaakko. Thank you, Anna. Is Anna still here? Yes. Do you have any questions, comments in auditorium or online? I think it's very fascinating history, and you can't escape the human nature. You can see in the historical material. Susanna will tell us how we will find the collections.
Yeah, so as Jaakko mentioned, then during the lunch break, some of you have registered for meeting the collections. So this is how you get from location A to the location B. So we are here, and you get to our National Library is here. So were there any other questions to Jaakko regarding the collection? It's always different, a very different experience hearing about the collections from the collection experts, such as Anna and Jaakko.
Hi, seeing as the leaves are parchment and made of animal material, has there been any biological research done as to where the animals grew and what kind of diversity was there and so on?
Indeed, there is. I am actually employed in a project called Codicum. That's an ESE synergy project, where the big part of the project is doing protein analysis of the parchment. So all the fragments in the National Library and all the fragments in the National Archives of Sweden, so that's almost 30,000 fragments, will be sampled for animal proteins. So it's mostly about the animal species, and possibly we get also other information that may help us to kind of group the parchment by the place of its production. But that's like, and then there will also be some hundreds of DNA analysis, but we don't yet quite know what will come out of this. But it's a very big sampling project. I just came on the Silja Line ferry with half a dozen Swedish conservators who are actually doing this sampling. So we are having another meeting in the National Library at the same time, where I will be soon going. So yes, this is being done. Yes.
And the next presentation will tell more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. This was Ronja Koistinen, who's our technical wizard in the IIIF.
And who's going to get hands-on with Fragmenta in the summer.
Yeah, please, Mikko.
Yes, thank you, Mikko Nykänen from National Library and Finna Services. Thank you, Jaakko. Very interesting information. Some of it already familiar for me, but a lot of it new. When we talk about this IIIF and other possibilities to bring these fragments together, what are what have been or at the moment are practical limitations for medievalists with this material? What is that you need at the moment?
Right. I guess there are kind of smaller cases. I mean, you could maybe smaller kind of research-related usages that people would like to, of course, refer to this material as images. So it would be convenient, let's say, even like a research publication online, so that you could just refer to, let's say, a certain area of the image. And not always needing to import the files and so there are these kind of like publication, for instance, but perhaps the biggest question is because there are all kind of union catalog type of collections like the Fragmentarium or the French systems, where it would be nice to also import our material, so it would be part of a bigger library as well, so that it would be discovered. The local systems like the Fragmenta, they are very important for researchers because often researchers target a specific collection, and it's very useful that it's limited in such a way. But it would also be a good thing on top of that to be able to integrate this material into like digital, let's say, union catalog type repositories that bring together medieval manuscripts from all over the world. So that's perhaps the most straightforward and kind of immediate need. And David will speak more about one case that's kind of in between these two kind of micro and macro levels, but so it will become more concrete. But that is basically ability to integrate this material into other contexts, into other collections digitally.
Yes, thank you. There's a question in the queue, I think.
There was a question in the chat. Is it possible to make a particular search to find manuscripts that include illustrations?
No. These kind of searches of this, they depend on metadata. Like when the Fragmenta collection was created, so we didn't have that, which is often the case when things are digitized. So that we had some cataloging resources, but they were limited. And the amount of information you can put into a catalog regarding a medieval manuscript, it's unlimited. I mean, you can go so deep in describing a medieval manuscript that one person will spend several days creating one cataloging record. So I was actually in charge of the metadata production. So we created a very streamlined process. So the metadata is not that complex, and we didn't include information on illustrations. So it's not possible. Perhaps using some kind of an AI thing, you can try your hand, but not by traditional filtering, metadata filtering or searches.
Yes, thank you so much, Jaakko, and everyone else. Thank you for good questions. And next we will have, yes, thank you, Jaakko.
Thank you.
Yes, next we will have David Haskiya, Head of Unit IIIF and Data Services from Riksarkivet, Swedish National Archives. Codicum project. Yes.
Hi, as mentioned, I'm David Haskiya. I work for the Swedish National Archives, but today I'm more here in the capacity of being one of the work package leaders for the Codicum project that Jaakko also mentioned and he's a member of, which means that I'm doing a presentation with the Codicum branding and not the Swedish National Archives branding. I saw Jaakko's presentation now, so I will try to touch back on it a little bit as we're presenting. So what I will talk about today is a little bit what we do in Codicum, but also what we won't do, because that's often as important when you're doing a project to define what we won't be doing. And do a little bit of a callback to what at least my research tells me was the original sort of impetus for IIIF in the beginning, and then show a little bit more what we do in practice. So that's sort of should be the takeaways today. So I won't read this aloud. You can read it yourself. But one thing to sort of clarify is that Codicum is a research project. It is not a digital infrastructure project, which means that we only do as much software development and data wrangling as is needed to answer the researchers' questions. We're not building a technical infrastructure that will live after the project ends. And this is one of the sort of key things to keep in mind when we're also emphasizing IIIF, because one of the advantages of IIIF is that you fetch images from source. You do not build a new joint image database that has to be maintained by someone after the project is over, because, as mentioned, this is a research project, not a digital infrastructure project. Jaakko would be much better placed to explain the research questions here, but fundamentally it is about how literature was introduced and how it was spread in the Nordic countries. And it's fundamentally also what do you call it, a cross-disciplinary project. We would not have gotten this funding if there wasn't work package 2, the whole biocodicological analyses, as they're called. That's what the European Research Council really sort of felt was strong in this project proposal, was that we were going to combine, what would I call it, traditional humanistic methods of manuscript studies and fragmentology with the scientific analyses of the materials. And then the digital part is just a support work package. So these are all the nerds, the lead nerds of the Codicum project, with me there at the bottom. Let me see if I don't know if I can play this. Yes. So some of you asked about, the sampling, and here is where you can actually see how the sampling is done, the protein sampling. With the DNA sampling, they actually cut away a little bit of the fragments. So this is what is called rubber sampling. And here is this. So this is from the Swedish collection, where the parchment covers are still around the account books. They haven't been sort of become loose leaves like in the Finnish collection. So, so as Jaakko mentioned, the protein analyses allows for species identification, and also given certain patterns as well, you might be able to say also, whether it's a cow from Finland or Germany and things like this. The DNA sampling, as I understand it, will catch not only the DNA of the animal who gladly and hopefully provided the parchment, but a lot of these cattle carry diseases, like, for example, cattle pox. And the DNA of those viruses can also be caught and sequenced. And an interesting thing with those, as Matthew, the work package leader of the biocodicological work package, can go on about for forever, is that how the flu basically changes every year, slight mutation. That's what happened with the cattle pox as well. So if you start off from a parchment that has a known date, like a medieval letter, on 12th of August, King Magnus of Sweden wrote this and this. If you then sort of take a DNA sample of that one and you identify the virus variant, you know that this is the virus variant of 1378. Then you sample loads of fragments that don't have dates. But if those match the virus of 1378, you now also have a on-the-year date of that particular fragment, for example. This is quite similar in a way to how you do dendrochronological analyses and carbon-14 dating. They also depend on having this sort of reference database of known dates. This is very new, so this project will actually help build that reference data set in a way. I sort of focus on this work package as well, since I'm the leader of the data management work package. This process, of course, these instruments that do the protein analyses and DNA analysis, their output is data, not paper. Loads and loads of data will be generated that represent the outputs of these samples. So that's also something to take care of for the future, for future research. So, I mentioned research project, not digital infrastructure, so we will build as little as possible. But that also means that, so for example, I have contacted the National Library here to ask, won't you please support IIIF? I cannot provide any funding for it, so it's up to the institution, but it would make the life of scholars a bit easier if they want to look at multiple sources together and so on, like we also explained. Other things that we try to emphasize as well. So interoperability is both technical interoperability and can you technically merge these sources? But there's also the rights question. And here we don't want to enforce any particular rights, just that it should be explicit so that the scholar doesn't have to guess, can I print this fragment in my book without paying a license fee, or can I not? So they had to have that explicit in the image itself. So typically with a Creative Commons license or a rightstatements.org rights statement. Technical and legal interoperability is something we want to encourage then for the major sources of Nordic fragments. And this is sort of, so Glenn will be able to confirm, I think, but my understanding is that when IIIF as a sort of framework of APIs was first envisioned, a strong sort of driving force for that was actually manuscript studies. And the fact that medieval manuscripts tend to be so spread out on different repositories, and I guess it's not so practical to send TIFF files around as email attachments and et cetera, et cetera. So it's much better if we could just fetch them from source, but view them in one viewer, for example, like Mirador, for example. And that's sort of the impetus for IIIF, and it works for other types of images as well, of course. But for fragments, of course, it's a very good way of ensuring technical interoperability for images. So a little bit more of what we do. I won't read this bullet points, but so the research engineer in my team, and there's another research engineer at the University of Bergen, what we usually say is that Codicum is very narrow in its scientific scope. It's about fragments. It's not even about whole books, it's fragments. But the data work that we do is very broad. And it's also a lot about just being responsive to the researcher needs, as in okay, one researcher, I think Jaakko, for example, or maybe it's its colleague Marco, I don't know, is very interested in fragments that have remains of calendars in them. Okay, can you create a data set that includes only the known Nordic fragments that have calendars in them? Yes, we can, but it takes quite a lot of work because of lacking metadata, but we can, yes. So our goal is to both publish sort of raw data that can be used analytically. So typically, we've noticed that what most researchers are comfortable with using is not, for example, XML or JSON, like a developer might want, but spreadsheets, CSV files, Excel files in colloquial terms. So for each major Nordic source of fragments, we would like to publish a sort of a base CSV file that contains as much of the metadata as possible, so that you can download it and create statistics, analyze it, and so on. And then we also then create bespoke data sets, so custom made to serve a particular research question, like the calendar example that I gave, or someone might want only the ones where the parchment has been identified as being from goat, rather than cows or sheep, for example. Whatever the researcher might be interested in, we will try to create in this data, in this project. This is a very early sketch that I made already when we were doing the application. So as I mentioned, we will try to build as little as possible. So, but there are certain things, exemptions to that. So one of the things is that in Finland, there's Fragmenta Membranea. In Sweden, there's MPO. In Norway, the University of Bergen has a research database of fragments that covers almost, the entirety of the Norwegian collection or Union collection. But in Denmark, the only thing that exists is a very badly scanned PDF file from the 1970s that sort of describes the known fragments in the Danish National Archives. The Danish National Library has a very good online source for their fragments, though. So we need to build something for Denmark, which is why it's in orange. Sorry about this overload. We need to build the samples, of course, the sample database. And then the only software that we will build is this sort of workbench and virtual library that I will also explain a bit more what that means. And then we will not build a portal called Nordic Fragments. So like I said, we won't build anything that really needs to be maintained after the project. But what we have set out to do is to try to provide the Nordic fragments to Fragmentarium, which is an already existing portal that collects fragment sources. So, why build that when it already exists? So in the future, hopefully in 2030-31, when this project is ended, if a scholar wants to look only at the Nordic fragments, they could go to Fragmentarium and add the facets country, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and then presto, they will have it. So that's the ideal, at least, what we aim for. So a little bit of, I won't rest on this very long. Jaakko just explained it. But here, yes, it would be lovely if it had support for IIIF. I mean, it's great, especially that the TIFF files are available in high resolution. Very few other organizations offer that. But as mentioned, it's not a very practical way of sharing images, is sending TIFFs this way and that way. Here, IIIF support would be lovely. I think, given the structure of Fragmenta Membranea, I think what, at least a hypothesis here, would be that you would create a IIIF collection, a top collection that represents all of the contents in Fragmenta Membranea. And then since it presents the books, you would have one level of collections that represents the books, and then each manifest would be actually a page, and you could sort of have a hierarchical IIIF collection that will allow you to navigate through all of it, because fundamentally a IIIF collection is just, you can have multiple levels in it. So that just an idea. MPO. Our old Swedish database. It's actually, the cataloging here is mentioned as well. Someone asked, can you search in Fragmenta Membranea and find everything that has illuminations? And Jaakko said no. And here the answer would be some. Because it's actually two generations of cataloging. One where they took their time and made quite a detailed catalog. Those you would get hits on. And then there was one generation of cataloging where they just wanted to sort of make the most basic metadata, but ensure that every fragment had a item in the database. And there you wouldn't. So the tricky thing with this one is that you could search for the illuminations, get a list, but the results would sort of mislead you, because you're actually in all likelihood missing out quite a lot of fragments that have illuminations, but the metadata doesn't contain it. So this is the reality of, I guess, being a data-driven scholar, is that you actually need to understand the quirks of every individual source that you're working with, because the devil is in the details, as you say in English. The University of Bergen research database, it's currently offline, but as part of the project, it will be redeveloped and relaunched, so it will be available online, at least by the end of the Codicon project, and they will have IIIF support. Here's actually a little preview from the test, from sort of in process development. This is a test manifest, so I won't share the link. It will probably die fairly soon, but just to show, this is one of the Bergen fragments, or rather one of the Norwegian fragments in the Bergen research database in the IIIF thesis viewer. They haven't decided yet which will be their default viewer, but I think it may be this one, because their lead researchers really like thesis, especially the way it presents collections, IIIF collections. So that's just a guess. the good thing, of course, with IIIF is that you can actually, it doesn't really in a way matter which IIIF you use in some ways. And then Fragmentarium, as mentioned, we won't build a portal of Nordic fragments. What we will try to do is contribute here instead. And then use the facets. Right now, there's only 1 fragment from Sweden and 4 from Denmark. Once we're done with this, actually, since we have so many fragments in the Nordic countries, Bill Duba, who's the manager of this, says that he might have to actually filter out the Nordic fragments by default because purely based on numbers, we will completely dominate this database. So actually here, the screenshot here is from a test import of the Swedish one. So the process is sort of underway here. Fragmentarium. And then this is the only piece of software we will develop, the Workbench and Virtual Library. So the idea here is that there are a couple of researchers in the project who would like to work with. So as you can imagine, given the history of Fragmenta, Membranea and the Swedish MPO, they all came from the same account books once upon a time. And of course, when the Russians demanded all of the Finnish account books, no one cared about that. That what happened in practice was that fragments coming from the same original book are now spread out across the Finnish and Swedish collection. The same is partially true, but for other reasons, between the Danish fragments and the Norwegian fragments, also part of the same kingdom. So there, between Denmark and Norway and between Sweden and Finland, there are loads of very well-known examples of where fragments from the same book have ended up in different databases. I'm quite sure once you research these, there are these cross collections also between Sweden and Norway or in Sweden and Denmark, I would think, but not as well known. So one of the things we want to do is to build a tool that will allow a scholar to pull in IIIF imagery from multiple different sources and then arrange them in a certain order, i.e. try to recreate the original order of the pages from one book, and also add blank pages from where the page is lost. So from one book, you might have, okay, page 1, 2, 3, and 4, we know are missing. 5 to 10 are in MPO. 11 and 12 are missing. 13 to 15 are in Fragmenta Membranea. 17 and 18 are missing. 19 are in MPO, etc., etc. And if we can do this using IIIF, the sort of reconstructed sequence or books can in itself be published as a IIIF collection. And you can open up that viewer, you can open up that collection in one viewer and page through the pages, not needing to bother or even know that the images come from different databases. So this is really, in some ways, the sort of, like I said, the original use case of IIIF. It's a developer called Rainer Simon, who we have contracted to develop this tool. This screenshot is from the first prototype that was delivered about a week ago. So it's not publicly available yet, and it's very, very basic because we want to start testing with our target user group, i.e. the scholars, already in a very, very early versions, that we don't put a lot of money developing something that they say, no, this is crap. So test early, test often. Just another screenshot here of what it can look like. The idea here as well is that so the Finnish and Swedish sample fragments that you've seen typically represent an entire page. I don't know if the Norwegians were just much more angry Protestants than Swedes and Finlands, but in Norway, they've torn the pages into very often little fragments. Actually, when you hear the word fragments, that's sort of what you think about, parts of pages, not whole pages. So with the Norwegian ones, what we want to do here is Okay, so to use a term, so in IIIF, an image can consist sort of what we call a canvas. And what we want to be able to do in this tool is also to put different images into one canvas, basically trying to sort of, because you can see from these fragments, okay, this was originally in the top right of the page, and this was originally somewhere in the middle, and this was somewhere in the bottom left. And sort of we want to be able to place that on an empty canvas to sort of reconstruct the parts of the page that we do have. So this is something that the tool is supposed to support as well. In the tab there called Canvas Composer is where you're supposed to be able to do that. Okay, so all that I talked about now is sort of part of the Codicum project. That's what we're funded to do. But as it happens, I'm also then the manager of the AI lab at the Swedish National Archives, and we do other types of work as well, but that could benefit the Codicum project and other manuscript studies. So one of the things that we're working with is HTR, so handwritten text recognition, turning images of handwritten text into digital, machine-readable, searchable text. Here is one of our prototypes. This one is actually available on Hugging Face. You can Google Riksarkivet Hugging Face and you will find it. It has access to a HTR model for medieval Latin that is based on openly published training data. If you create an AI model, you need to give it training data so that it learns to do what it's supposed to do. So here we haven't created any training data ourselves. We've just taken what is publicly available, and this is a Codicum fragment being sort of transcribed into Latin here. So why would that be interesting? Because if we can get an HTR Latin model that is decently precise, we can turn the content of these fragments into text that can be searched, for example, through the IIIF Content Search API. And you can also do other things. So this page, we have also a unit of medieval source publication at the National Archives, and the boss there, Claus, he just looked at this page and he said, "Oh, this is from the second book of Chronicles in the Bible." And yes, that's also what our AI tells us. So what we tried here was once we had this as text, we could compare it to known medieval texts, a major one being the medieval Vulgata, the Bible as it was most spread in medieval Europe. And we ran a similarity analysis. So this page that we have just HTR'd, what is it similar to? And the analysis said, oh, it's most similar to second book of Chronicles and certain verses. And in this case, it was correct. This is a happy case. It doesn't always work. But what we could do then, we're using different AI models, is to assist, for example, a scholar or a cataloger to, for example, be able to compare this text and then maybe add to the metadata that this represents second book of Chronicles, verses 7 to 19. We've also done other simpler AI models that only look at a medieval a manuscript page and say, there is music notation here. That's all it does. Is there music notation? Yes, no. Or rather, it's a confidence value. Or is there calendar information here? Yes, no. Is there illumination? Is there illumination here? Yes, no. These are also little models that could help assist cataloging. So that's something that we're interested in doing. Is not formally part of the project, but something that we're experimenting with. Okay. My last slide is, well, basically IIIF would help out. This is, it also supports future use cases like the searching within transcribed texts. Something we won't do in this project, but I know that the National Library here does in other projects, is multispectral imaging, where you can sort of make visible things on a page that isn't visible to the naked eye or to the visible light spectrum. That's also something that if you if you do your IIIF manifest the right way, you can then have a little IIIF viewer allowing you to see that side by side and so on. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
Thank you. Very fascinating. Do we have questions here in the auditorium or in the chat? Yes.
Hi, I'm Leena Saarinen from National Library. I happen to know that Fragmenta Membranea is cataloged using Dublin core, but what about these other databases? Do they use different formats, and what
they all use different formats?
Yeah,
that's the reality of the world. So one of the things as well that we decided in Codicum was that we wouldn't try to invent the one metadata model to rule them all. We just don't have the budget for that. It typically takes years and years, and there's no guarantee that it will become the standard metadata model. In all likelihood, it would become standard model number 15. So since we're not building an infrastructure, it's also the case that when a scholar wants something, we take whatever is there, whether it's TEI XML or Dublin Core or whatever, and we wrangle the data into something simple to a scholar to use, which is usually a flat CSV file, and the best way we can. Yeah. The reality is, there is no one standard that dominates. We in Sweden, MPO, we follow no standard at all. It's just Fragmenta Membranea does Dublin Core, as you mentioned. I think the University of Bergen has some sort of SciDoc CRM-based thingamajig. The Danes have nothing, and so on. So it's just the Wild West when it comes to metadata. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. There's another question from Grete.
Would be good for those who do make IIIF resources available to have a see also link to whatever metadata they have available, because the metadata in the IIIF manifest is supposed to be for display, not really for what I would call it real metadata, but it's simplified just for display. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Grete Veensalo from National Library of Estonia, and the input data is in very different formats. But for example, the data you give out to research or data sets that you publish, do you have one standard or?
No, not really. As in, so one of the things we want to do is for each major source, we want to publish a CSV file. And basically our guiding principle will be there. There's always the risk when you flatten something into a CSV file that you lose data. And we just try to work on the principle, try to lose as little as possible. That's our guideline. If then, for example, a scholar wants to merge something, it's also up to them. If the scholar says, I'm very comfortable working with XML, then we might try to, we'll try to export this as TEI. We'll try to wrangle this into TEI XML, no matter what the input data is. Unless we sort of analyze, we could do that, but it would take so much work that we'd rather give you a CSV file or something else. So it's a bit up to what the scholar is comfortable with. This is one of the advantages, so to speak, of we are not building a aggregator or portal, which means that we don't actually have to fully harmonize the metadata. Only as much as is needed to support a scholar's specific research question. Yeah. And then those data sets might be useful to other scholars, so we will publish them on Zenodo. So if anyone else has use of them, they will be there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.